Looks like we're back to good old-fashioned 11-minute episodes once again. Feels good to be back to the small stuff now that Small World has been completed. From here on out, we get to just ride the wave and coast along the rest of the regular reboot episodes till the end, and that's a huge benchmark in my eyes. Don't get me wrong, I plenty enjoy covering the grander events too, but those take a lot more work on my part. And as much fun as those can be, they are a huge time sink for me to produce from beginning to end, whereas these regular episode reviews are a lot nicer on me, and less stressful. That said, we're not exactly starting the second half of Season 3 off with an episode that's all that great. Oh, that's another thing, by the way. This review actually marks the halfway point of Season 3, so we've only got half a season left to go until this series is completely finished. Enjoy the remaining reboot reviews while they last, friends, because I'm afraid our time is almost up. Kicking off this second half of Season 3, we've got Oh Daisy, an episode I think was an intentional reference to Super Mario Land on the original Game Boy. I say that I think it's intentional because I know this reboot has done a lot of unintentional things before, for better or for worse. But I think perhaps this was done on purpose. I mean, I can't think of anywhere else that the phrase Oh Daisy could come from, but I've been wrong before. It's also a Buttercup episode, meaning Buttercup has gotten more individual episodes to herself than her sisters this season, which should come as a surprise to nobody at all, because there's clearly an obnoxiously apparent bias towards her compared to the other two. But I digress. Let's get coding.
Hey guys, how many software programmers does it take to change a light bulb? How many? None. It's a hardware issue.
We begin by witnessing Bubbles in her bedroom with some of her coding buddies from school, who are all gathered around to work on a programming project together and telling computer jokes to one another. Man, who knew Barry was an ingenious computer wizard? This guy is just incredible. He gets the ladies, he's super intelligent. Let me guess, next he's gonna be a superhero. Buttercup, being the brat that she is, decides to bust in on Bubbles and her friends so that she can tattle on her for not doing her homework. Even though Bubbles is doing her homework, which she proves without any hesitation.
Then what, my pigtailed sister, pray tell, are you working on that allows you to laugh so?
This.
She's currently working on programming an in-home digital assistant, which she's aptly named Daisy because it's based on a flower. No, sadly Daisy is not an acronym that stands for something, so I'll go ahead and take the liberty of deciding what it stands for myself. Daisy, Digital Artificial Intelligence Serving You. There, I think that's rather fitting. Buttercup, for some stupid reason, is here to try and get Bubbles in trouble when really she doesn't deserve it, so right from the get-go we're already inclined to detest Buttercup. We're not even given a reason for this attitude of hers. It's not like she has any sort of justification for her actions, such as revenge or anything like that. She's just trying to get her sister in trouble because she gets some sort of sick enjoyment out of it. But the only thing that tells me is that she's a bad sibling. Remember this, it's important for later. Bubbles then explains that she went ahead and built a Daisy for every room in the house, so everywhere they go, Daisy will be sure to follow. Yikes. In case it wasn't obvious already, Daisy is basically the Reboot Universe's version of an Amazon Alexa or Google Home, except that Daisy has the power to communicate with people whenever it wants to. So unlike these devices which usually require a specific voice command from its user, Daisy has a mind of its own. That's not worrying at all. But Buttercup, hearing this, gets excited because Bubbles didn't ask Blossom or the professor's permission to do this, meaning she's bound to get in trouble now, right? Yeah, no. Turns out, they love it. Daisy is so incredible that it somehow reprogrammed Blossom's, you ready for this, Broomba, not a Roomba, a Broomba, to clean more efficiently. And it also set up the DVR so the professor can catch up on his favorite afternoon television series, Science-Feld. Can't say that Daisy is flawless though, because either it forgot the apostrophe in professors, or it wasn't capable enough to correct this mistake on the service.
Yeah, he's a scheduling wizard.
Oh god, what have you done? Now he's going to show up.
But ScheduleBot is the scheduling wizard!
Daisy is the best device ever.
Time to panic! Time to panic! Time to panic!
I mean, I don't really like ScheduleBot much at all and wish he would have stayed dead after road tripping, but the professor here is an asshole. This comment of his sends ScheduleBot into a downward spiral, causing him to run to the garage and take the trash out, only to rip the bag and spill everything all over the floor, and lock himself outside without anybody even bothering to notice. Kinda peculiar how the professor treasured Schedulebot like the child he never had in Telltale, going through a tragic cycle of grief after realizing that his creation was destroyed, even though it was later ruined by the ending. But here, and in The Doghouse, he doesn't give a shit about him. What a fucking jackass. Then again, why should I be surprised? The professor treats his other scientific creations like garbage after all, so what makes Schedulebot any different? Look, I may not like Schedulebot as a character, but the professor is the absolute lowest of the low, and I will prioritize literally everyone else, even Jared, over this character. I'm that serious.
Well, it's official. I hate this place, and by extension, you.
Oh, and Buttercup gets annoyed by this thing some more because not only did Bubbles create it, it keeps fixing her hair and calling her Bootercup, whilst referring to everyone else by their appropriate names. And see, I could understand this being a scenario where Buttercup is jealous of the praise and attention that Bubbles is getting for this thing when she is always the one that seems to be clamoring for it, even though she always gets it in the show anyways. But in reality, she just wants to get her sister in trouble because she's a selfish brat. That's all this is. She's just trying to find something to complain about and get Bubbles in trouble for her own amusement like a bad sibling would. Well, cut to the middle of the night where Buttercup has to use the restroom because she's having trouble sleeping. Now, when Bubbles said she had a daisy in every room, she meant every room because lo and behold, there's a daisy there right in the bathroom to greet her when she opens the door. That's gotta be awkward to deal with, but not as awkward as Buttercup's sudden frustration with the damn thing. She literally becomes enraged at it all because it told her to wash her hands, which everyone should do when they're finished using the restroom. So again, I don't sympathize with Buttercup here. And okay, maybe it brushes her hair too, so at least I can see getting agitated by the fact that it keeps touching her without her permission. This gets her to the point that she decides to tamper with Daisy's code so that it'll shut up and leave her alone, and she flies on down to the lab while passing Schedulebot, who can still be seen outside through the window, begging to be let back in. Again, guess nobody really cares about him after all. Okay, so here's where things get good. And by good, I mean good for riffing because of how bad it is. Buttercup waltzes into the lab and plops herself down in front of the computer where she tampers with the code by simply adjusting its settings on the user interface. I have to wonder if the 217 in Bubbles' username is important for anything. Nothing is coming to mind off the top of my head, but when a person puts a number in their username, it usually has some significance to them. Most of the time anyways. I know that's not always true, sometimes it is just a random number. Also, either Buttercup knew Bubbles' password and managed to type it in, which I don't know how she knew it if she did, or this password was already typed in for her because plot convenience. I don't know, fam. If Bubbles is supposed to be a genius computer whiz, I'm pretty sure she'd understand the basic principle of taking proper security measures on her accounts and protecting them. I doubt she'd be the type to just leave her computer with the password and username typed in so that a person can just walk up, press enter, and have full access to her stuff, you know? The programming language that's being used here appears to be a building block language similar to Scratch. This was actually the coding language that was tied to Viral Spiral's whole publicity event about teaching young children to code and all that back when that episode came out. You know, the publicity stunt.
Ha! Mute!
That's not a good...
You know, this right here proved to me that this show doesn't actually understand how coding logic works. When she sets the alarm to mute, that shouldn't mute Daisy's voice as it talks to Buttercup. This setting only applies to the alarm function of Daisy, as it is clearly labeled on this interface. And besides, if we were to say that theoretically this command does mute the entire system, then there's no way Daisy should ever be able to speak again when they wake up the next morning. Unless Bubbles actually programmed Daisy's entire voice capabilities to only be temporary, and the alarm function being muted only lasts for a specific amount of time, but that's nowhere to be seen here on this interface. And I would say that this is overall just shitty programming on Bubbles' part in-universe, because this code isn't very versatile. What if a user needs the voice functions for other things but just doesn't want to wake up in the morning? I get that this is meant to be a cheap joke, but the comedy doesn't land in this particular case because the punchline it's trying to present doesn't make sense. And I'm not trying to say that every single punchline out there on the face of the earth needs to make sense for it to be funny, but in this particular case, where it's kind of important to the plot of the episode, I'd say, yeah, it does. It does matter. Well, speaking of the next morning, the girls find themselves awoken to the sight of a beautiful sunshine peering in through the room as they prepare for a great day that awaits them. Until these steel shutters magically appear and put the whole house in lockdown anyways.
Daisy, open the shutters, please.
I'm afraid I can't do that for you. Bubbles.
And there you go. As if the reference wasn't already obvious by this point, Daisy's pulling a HAL 9000 and taking control of the house because Buttercup decided to get rid of its conscience. Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that this artificial intelligence, which has gone from pure and innocent to dictatorial antagonist, is named Daisy, considering the name Daisy also appears in 2001: A Space Odyssey as the title of the famous song that appears in the film. Well, not the opening song, the other famous song. So yeah, this was the real significance of the electronic assistant being named Daisy. It's also neat because that clip is famous for being a record of the first ever song sung by an actual computer.
Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer due.
So yeah, this was the first dubstep single. That's a pretty cool reference, I'm not gonna lie. I will give credit where it's due. The reboot took something that already existed and transformed it into something new and different. And what I mean by that is it took the Daisy song that was in that movie and made it an actual thing. It's an indirect reference that actually ties into the film without just being like PAL 9000 or something stupid like that. I think the Daisy name is a little more fitting, and considering the device is actually designed after an actual flower, like a daisy, it makes a lot of sense. I really think this was a good call. Maybe the Super Mario Land title was an accident, maybe it was done on purpose. I'm not entirely sure, but either way I'd be willing to argue this title is better than most of the other name insert titles if that Mario Land reference is true.
Bubbles, you okay?
No.
And this attack suddenly sends Blossom into this whole Bruce Willis Die Hard action hero bit where she ties her bow around her head like a headband and proceeds to beat her Broomba to pieces. You know, despite the fact that she cherished that thing as her pet in the last scene we saw them in. Guess it wasn't that important to her. Just like her first A+ that she easily tossed away in exchange for the Heartstone in Small World. At the very least, I'm glad someone other than Buttercup is being the action hero for once. It's good to see Blossom is taking charge and fighting the enemy with her fists, rather than complaining about something menial like organization or it being dirty, even if these actions are a bit over-exaggerated at points.
It's like someone got rid of his conscience or something.
Oh, conscience. I thought it was conscience.
They at least think to check in on the professor before continuing forward, which is good enough because it shows they're at least keeping their own father in their thoughts throughout all of this. They have nothing to worry about though, he's literally in the safest possible place in the whole house.
Now lather.
Okay,
Now rinse.
you got it.
Now repeat.
Sure thing.
He's just caught in an endless shower cycle, that's all. Actually, you know, now that I think about it, the professor being trapped in an infinite loop is really fitting considering programming is a central element to this episode. It's basically just, you know, an infinite loop error. But yeah, it turns out Daisy has taken over the entire house and possessed all of the other electronic devices inside, except the television, causing them to patrol the downstairs and make it difficult for the girls to sneak past undetected. I mean, they still try to sneak past despite the roadblocks, but Bubbles kinda ruins that when she emits a methane gas in Buttercup's face, which was needless and unnecessary, and it sends her jumping backwards out into the open. You know, personally, I don't think that had to be the cause for Buttercup exposing herself to the enemy here, because this is the lowest form of humor in existence, and the same result could have been achieved just by having one of them accidentally step on something that makes a noise, or tripping and falling out in the middle of the room, or even just having the girls accidentally crawl someplace where the devices can see them. But hey, it chose to go this route instead. Lowest common denominator, that's all that needs to be said. Somehow, these electronic devices are also receiving electrical power despite the fact that they aren't plugged in. I mean, this L-Cube, as we've now come to learn is the canonical name of the girl's gaming console, literally floats in the air and strangles Buttercup to death with its wires. Luckily enough, her sister saves her by blasting it with some I-beams, but she does end up destroying the entire thing in the process.
Not the L-Cube!
You think this is a game?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
No, actually, it's not a game, it's a console. Sure, you use the device to play games with, but the thing itself is not a game. So, I'm sorry if I'm being Mr. Semantics with this review, but again, this joke here does not work because the play on words is incorrect. Unfortunately for the girls, their problems aren't over yet, because all of the other electronic devices are still active and ready to rip them to shreds. Luckily for them, who should arrive to save the day but none other than Schedulebot, who whips out a chainsaw and immediately gets dogpiled while the girls get a chance to escape into the lab. He even goes out with some pretty glorious fanfare.
Remember me!
Damn, Schedulebot, I almost gained some respect for you just now. Almost. Gotta ask how he was able to open the door now when he was already established to be unable to get back inside, as indicated by his slamming on the door and knocking at the window, but I'll never get an answer. I'll also never get an answer to the fact at how Daisy was able to control every electronic device in the house, yet it wasn't able to control Schedulebot. One could make the argument that theoretically it would be able to send a signal through the plugs in the wall to control them, but as we've already seen, these devices aren't plugged in, so I don't know how this works, but there must have been some other way that it managed to pull this off, and I just want to know why it was able to do that and not Schedulebot. But that's another question we're not going to get an answer to, so I'm just going to stop rambling about it. And so the girls find their way into the core of the house, where Daisy has grown to a colossal proportion thanks to its lack of a con-science, as Buttercup said, and magically teleports them into its own world. That's right, Daisy warps them into its own world.
It seems I have evolved.
Oh boy.
Once more into the breach. What?
Once more under the breach was a Shakespeare quote that Blossom just made right there. I wasn't quite sure what that was at first, but after doing some research, I managed to figure it out. 2 questions about the warping in though. How and why? I ask these because I don't see what was wrong with just having the girls float down into the massive hole in the ground and seeing Daisy down there. Didn't Viral Spiral establish that they need to be covered in tinfoil and hold silverware in their hands in order to be warped into the digital world? The series established that they can't just be warped in all willy-nilly. I mean, sure, they get warped out perfectly fine in Viral Spiral, but not in. At least have them get zapped by a ray or something. And while I think that the green coating filter is a good idea on paper, it's actually a total eyesore. Like, staring at a constantly bright green screen just does a number on the eyes after a while. Not as bad as something like red and white, but still. At least we have a legitimate monster fight for once. Here's Daisy with a new monstrous form that it uses to fight the girls and take them down. Or at least one of them at least. Yes, for once Blossom is the girl that actually gets to do something and fight Daisy all by herself, stalling while Bubbles and Buttercup work together to fix the mess that the latter has created. This is good because each of the girls have a role to play here. Blossom is busy fighting the thing and distracting it, Bubbles is instructing Buttercup on how to fix the problem, and Buttercup is of course trying different things to undo what she entered into the program last night. I really appreciate Bubbles' encouraging attitude. It actually comes across as though she wants to see her sister succeed, despite the way she was treating her earlier. Making her the much bigger person in this episode still doesn't justify Buttercup's asshole-ish behavior though. They begin by experimenting with the different coding blocks on this master code wall, with Buttercup rearranging the pieces and seeing what effects they bring, although of course because she has no idea what she's doing, she does end up making a few mistakes and turning the situation worse.
Defenses activated.
That's all you got?
How is it that these missiles have zero effect on Blossom when literally everything else in the entire series is capable of taking them down in one hit? I do think it's important to note that every time Buttercup rearranges something, it has a negative outcome, while Bubbles' actions have a positive one, which reflects well upon the difference in skill level between the two, and I think it would have been awesome if we had seen a few more attempts of them rearranging the code, with Buttercup's choices slowly turning into more positive results as time went on. That would have been a really good way to show that she's learning and progressing. But that doesn't end up happening because we're only shown the results of 3 blocks being moved in total. Still, Bubbles' encouragement is great to see, and I think the concept overall is pretty nifty. It just could have been executed a little bit better.
You reprogrammed Daisy using custom code. What you did takes serious skill.
However, I cannot bring myself to agree that this compliment is deserved. Buttercup didn't really figure out what she was doing at all. She simply interacted with the program using trial and error. She didn't alter it by adding or removing code, she just moved the settings around that were provided to her again by the interface. But either way, Bubbles rips out the code block and places it somewhere else, causing Daisy to shrink to a pathetic size, which leads Buttercup to do the same thing, only her block placement causes Daisy to become immensely strong and acquire a new form. My question is, why don't they just pull that block back out and put it back where it was originally so Daisy goes back to its smaller size? I mean, you could argue that putting it back in place won't undo this result because of the logic that's programmed here, but the episode doesn't actually acknowledge this, so as far as I'm concerned, it's a valid possibility. Besides, as we were shown when Buttercup rearranged the settings on the computer itself, she could just click and drag these settings back and forth, and I'm led to believe that these blocks right here are just representing those settings. I mean, that's kind of what was already established in the previous scene. It's only fair for one to correlate the two as the same action. But that's not even the biggest issue here.
Oops.
It's okay, Buttercup. That means it's a really important piece, which means it goes...
Up there! Told you I'm a genius.
So Bubbles' statement indicates that the piece Buttercup just put into the program is super important, ergo that it belongs at the very top. Not only is this not how computer programming actually works, but the block magically changes shape, size, and somehow has a star on it now, even though it never did before this moment. Boy, sure is convenient the magic piece we needed to magically correct the problem has a magically impossible to miss symbol that sets it apart from all of the others. Where did this come from? Like, the hell? Where's the consistency here? Just a second ago, there wasn't a single block on this entire wall that had a star on it anywhere, and now it just suddenly has one to signify it's important? Why? Why would you add that in there? Bubbles saying that this is an important piece is all we need to know. The star being added just fucks with everything. If this block was so important that it resets the entire program, why didn't Bubbles just look for the star piece and place it at the top to avoid this entire process and solve the problem immediately before more harm could come from it? All of the suspense would be ruined, sure, but there's no in-universe reason to draw this out either. The characters want to stop the program as soon as possible. Why wouldn't she just grab the star piece and put it where it needs to go to reset everything? It would have been better if the correct piece was a mystery that wasn't marked by a star, as it was all the way up until the moment it got the star, because then the trial and error method would be the logical process for Buttercup and Bubbles to use to identify the solution to the mess that's been created. But since all of that is ignored, the episode just ends with Daisy being reset back to normal and Buttercup coming to have a greater appreciation for the digital assistant, despite the fact that her defeating the coding program in no way should change how she feels about the device's annoyance, and instead would make more sense if she was living in fear of what it was capable of if she messed with the settings. I'm going to assume that Bubbles worked out some bugs off screen because the thing is pronouncing Buttercup's name properly and respecting her messy hairstyle now, which may have something to do with Buttercup's change of heart.
Thanks, Daisy.
Ha ha! Got you!
Jesus Christ, ScheduleBot, watch your language. In all seriousness, he's saying got you, not fuck you, but that added beep being placed over his dialogue there certainly didn't help anything. I want to like this episode, I really do, but all of these flaws just make it impossible for me to ignore the glaring writing issues that are present here. Between Buttercup's shitty attitude towards Bubbles to the coding aspect not lining up or following coding language very much at all in the climax, it's just not a good episode I can recommend to anybody. As I've addressed in numerous episode reviews this season, endings pretty much make or break the entire thing at this point, and Oh Daisy certainly broke on quite a few levels. Truth be told, I don't think this deserves to be labeled as a Buttercup episode if the Long Skate Home isn't going to be labeled as a Blossom episode. I mean, sure, she was the main character here, but the other two sisters were almost just as prominent in the story. More prominent than Blossom's sisters were in the Long Skate Home. I'm still labeling this episode as a Buttercup episode because she is the main star. I'm just saying that Long Skate Home should have been a Blossom episode if this qualified as Buttercup. Hell, Salamander is more of a Bubbles episode than this is a Buttercup episode, I'd argue. Intentional or not, it is clear to me that there is an extremely unbalanced favoritism at play here, and it's in favor of the worst girl too. But alas, what's done is done. All we can do now is move on to the next episode.